Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton. Going to do a little state of recruiting today in the wake of Mark Bowman, tight end out of Santa Ana, California, Mater Dei, committing to USC yesterday after being offered a seven-figure multi-year deal by the USC Trojans, allegedly. Gerry, you and I wanted to talk about it because we felt like we talked about it a little bit this morning in the Saturday conversation, CJ and I did, but maybe not in the depth that we needed to because of two things. One, what does it really mean? Right now USC is being very aggressive on the NIL front. Miami's being very aggressive on the NIL front. Texas is aggressive on the NIL front, but they're a little bit more, I wouldn't say reserved, but judicious. Maybe the same as Georgia and Ohio State in that regard. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in recruiting. This episode brought to you by our recruiting sponsor, Mark Saunders, over at Allstate Insurance. Make sure you give Mark a call, 512-218-8571. You're in good hands with Texas alum Mark Saunders, 35-plus years experience, local to the Austin Round Rock area. That's Mark Saunders, 512-218-8571. All right, Gerry. I just described to folks the idea behind USC's front-running aspect of how they're handling recruiting. Miami has a big visitor weekend this weekend as well, where guys like Hezzy Kent are down in South Beach. That's the other tight end that Texas has really identified and circled. Give us your take. You're a longtime national recruiting analyst. Give us your take of the state of recruiting nationally right now and how Texas fits into that.
Yeah, it's interesting because Kirby Smart kind of hit on in his own way at SEC meetings earlier this week in Destin. But I think there's different groups of teams you're competing against now that are going about NIL in different ways, right? There's the USC Miami, who you said are being hyper aggressive. In the case of Miami, multi-year deals, which I think some colleges are staying away from that because until this House settlement, and you can talk about this, Bobby, until this House settlement comes down one direction or the other, some schools are kind of putting themselves in tough positions because Deloitte could come in and kick one of those out real quickly and say, no. Then you have issues. So I think there's, like Kirby, he didn't use the schools, but there's USC and Miami. And look, hat tip for Mark Bowman for USC. We're just talking about this. And then I think Georgia, Florida, Ohio State, you said it, some of the other schools that Texas is competing against. So I think there's different buckets now.
LSU is in that bucket, I think. Oklahoma's in that bucket.
Yeah, there's different buckets that you're competing with in NIL right now. Until this House settlement comes down one direction or the other, there's some programs that are kind of they're approaching NIL right now differently. There's also a lot more front-loaded contracts. And we've been talking about this from even basketball in the portal recruiting, where that was really going from a front-loaded situation in basketball, trying to get some of these contracts done and front-loaded before that House settlement comes down. So I think we're in a position that's different from a year ago even, Bobby, and that you almost have to put some of these guys in different buckets that Texas is competing with nationally, which we really haven't done to this point.
I hear you on that, Gerry. Let's take a step back. Kirby Smart this week in Destin said that he has heard that colleges, not any in the SEC, are promising players $20,000 a month to commit right now. Now, if they ever decommit or go somewhere else, they have to pay that $20,000 back. Okay, as part of their agreement. And therefore, they're getting guys to commit early and be in the class. The question I have, and this is really, you talk about Deloitte and what as we sit here today on Saturday afternoon, the House settlement has not passed, and they've got about a month before the colleges were expected to begin paying players. Texas is ready to go either way, by the way. Whether the House settlement settles or not, Texas is going to be good on its commitment to players. so I'm not concerned about Texas, but some of these schools are going to be between a rock and a hard place on this, because some of them may end up breaking their own state laws to pay these guys. But what I want to say this, Kirby's saying 20 grand a month to recruits that aren't even on your campus yet.
Yes.
Okay. Deloitte, the question I have, does Deloitte even oversee recruits, or do they just oversee people once they get on campus? And then it goes through the clearinghouse of sorts. In my opinion, and this is just from what I'm being told, Texas sees that as part of the whole process. They're not going to start paying players before they get on campus unless, something changes in the matter. The idea here is, and neither is Georgia or these other schools, they are willing to participate in NIL and happy participants, but it makes no sense to do a 3-year deal with a big offensive tackle out of Missouri, like Miami did, for what, $5 million, I think we heard, something like that, or $7 million for Mark Bowman, 3-year deal out at USC at the tight end. All of this to be said, I think that what we're waiting on here is really some determination about what is legal and what's not. But, look, Texas's view, in my opinion, is that, $2.5 million a year for a tight end is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And not at the current rates, not at the current situation. And I think that's just the way it's going to be, even if the clearinghouse does not come to pass.
Right.
So it to your point, whether it's USC, Miami, they're kind of out there. Even Oregon, and you've seen this, is taking a step back in this category at this time. Texas, Ohio State, Alabama. You mentioned Georgia. I mentioned LSU as well. There's a lot of schools, A&M, playing similar, but USC and Miami kind of are different. The two teams on the coast, for whatever reason, feeling like maybe they're private schools. That might have some relevancy there. But for whatever reason, they're playing to a different tune right now, almost as if the clearinghouse will never exist. And even if it does, they don't care.
Right.
That's very interesting, because while Miami plays in the ACC, which has, they pretend to have a big academic bent at times. When they let Miami in the first time, it wasn't because of academics. So my point being that's one thing. This Big Ten with USC is a lot different, because USC is a private school, and the Big Ten is almost, other than Northwestern, had been all public schools. So USC doing this while they're competing in the Big Ten, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Big Ten has to say about it. But I agree with you. It's a new landscape entirely, and one we just don't know what it's going to look like. And furthermore, and this is what you and I are talking about with Hezi Kent, what it's going to do and how it's going to affect guys who are visiting the Miamis and USCs of the world already. So Hezi Kent, the tight end out of Brunswick, Georgia, that Texas is really recruiting hard. What are your thoughts on how that's going to affect the Longhorns with the tactic that they're deploying at this point?
Well, and that's the thing. I think there's 9 or 10 Texas got targets that are visiting Miami, right? And is Miami going to get all of them? No. Is Texas going to get all of them? No. But we're talking about here's the select guys, and really, how's the market changing on the 5-star kids too, by the way, because that's something else, because rankings matter. And how's the market changing for your higher ranked, high-end 5-star guys? Because that seems to be going different direction now as well. And those are very hard to get a return on investment from year one to the level of some of these. I mean, guys would have to, if you look at a Mark Bowman, he literally have to go in, and Brock Bowers had 56 catches for 880 yards, 13 touchdowns his freshman year. That's what you're going to be measured against. I mean, that's really what you're going to be measured against as far as, okay, did USC get an ROI from a contract like NIL contract like that on a freshman tight end who was a reclass from 27 to 26. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But, in the case of Miami, look, I think some of these schools really, if they go the multi-year contract route in with big numbers, I think there's going to be some schools that kind of walk away on some of those recruitments, even if they're really, really good players. And that's kind of, you're seeing that. Look, we talk about this, we're on Texas football, but Georgia lost 2 of their top 3 offensive guys in this class. They got Jared Curtis back, but they lost Mark Bowman and Jackson Cantwell to USC and Miami. And look, it's not like, I want to be clear, it's not like Mark Bowman agrees to an NIL deal and Texas and Georgia isn't contacted to say, hey, man, here's the deal, right? I mean, they were, and they chose to say, no, we're not going there. And that's their obviously prerogative, and that's their decision to make. So it's really going to be interesting to see, like this weekend in Miami, Derek Cooper, Lamar Brown, Samari Matthews. Derek Cooper doesn't have his OV scheduled yet. The next weekend is Hezzy Kent, some of those guys coming in. So it's 2 big weekends in a row that Miami's going to be hosting a number of guys Texas is after, the James Johnsons of the world, Justice Fitzpatrick. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are going to be visiting Miami the next 2 weekends. So the question is going to become for me is, how aggressive is Miami going to be in these next 2 or 3 weekends, and how could that affect? Because a lot of these kids now, it's not just Texas we're talking about. It's Texas, Georgia, Florida. A lot of these kids are visiting the same group of schools. So how is that going to be how's that going to affect those schools? And look, and I'll say this, what Miami and USC may be doing to battle the SEC is probably a smart move on their end on some of these kids, but then it's going to push the chips to the table. And your Texas, Georgia, and Floridas of the world are going to have to make decisions that they probably don't want to make in June, especially if they're still waiting on the House Settlement Agreement.
It's very interesting because what they're doing is theoretically illegal in future terms.
Right.
And so if the House settlement is approved, that you can't say that a tight end is going to be worth $7 million. There's no true NIL of a tight end. Travis Kelce may be the only tight end in the country that's worth $7 million in NIL. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and that includes some great players. So Brock Bowers does not make $7 million in NIL in the NFL right now. He makes it for his contract, but not for his actual NIL. So I think what Miami or what USC is doing is clearly saying the House settlement, even if it comes through, we're either going to challenge it in the court of law or ignore it, or, they're promising things to players right now that may or may not happen, in my opinion. And, what's going to happen to Mark Bowman is he may become ineligible because of that, and I just don't know how all of this is going to fit together. It doesn't. What they're doing, Miami and USC, I hear what you're saying. It could be smart. It could be really dumb too, because I will say this, if the NCAA comes in and says those contracts are illegal, and I'm Mark Bowman and I'm Jackson Cantwell, the 2 big names that we've been talking about here, I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I chose your school in the first place, and you kind of misled me that this was going to happen, and all of a sudden I'm back to square one in my recruitment, and my favorite team that I was going to go to may already have a couple of tight ends, or may already be filled up at offensive tackle.
Yeah.
And that can be we'll see what it means and see how far they go and whether the House settlement happens. Jerry, Texas had 8 commitments overall right now.
Yep.
Okay. Quarterback Diabell, obviously one of the top guys in the country. Texas looking for a pair of running backs, but that looks like it's going to be KJ Edwards most likely, and maybe a nationally ranked guy too, or it could just end up being KJ Edwards as well. At wide receiver, 2 or 3 prospects we think they're going to go in on. Jermaine Bishop is already committed to Texas. He may be a wide receiver, he may be a DB. We don't know yet. But Jalen Lott, one of those names. Chris Stewart over at Shadow Creek. We believe they're still going to get a visit from Jabari Mack. Caden Finley is coming up on a decision between Texas and Notre Dame. There are a lot of guys in the boat there. At tight end, after Mark Bowman, what's left there? Is it Hezzy Kent or bust, or or what's
Hezzy Kent and Caden Prothrow out of Bowden, Georgia. Caden Prothrow not scheduled to go visit Texas till June 20th. He's at Georgia this weekend. Georgia having one of their big recruiting weekends, which is Xavier Crowell, Caden Prothrow, James Johnson, Tico Crittenden, Justin Fitzpatrick. Big that some schools go early, some schools go late. Caden Prothrow, by the way, now almost if there's a must get for Georgia at tight end, Prothrow now becomes that guy because he's an in-state guy where, there were picks being put in nationally either for Georgia or Texas on Mark Bowman until USC came big with their NIL package. So what does that puts a little more pressure on Georgia to get Caden Prothrow. So on the tight end position, it's Hezzy Kent and it's Caden Prothrow right now for Texas as of May 31st.
At the offensive line, Texas also has 2 commitments. Nick Robertson over at Klein, as well as Max Wright from Melissa up in the DFW area. The tackles on the board still are Turntine at North Crowley, Felix Ojo out of the Mansfield area, Sam Roseborough out of Clearwater, Florida, Malachi Lee out of Honolulu, Zayden Crippen could be an inside or outside guy. He's actually visiting, I believe, LSU this weekend. Lamar Brown, who you said is visiting Miami. There's quite a few still on the offensive line. What about on the defensive line, though, Jerry, where, frankly, Jamion Winfield out of Richardson committed to USC.
Yeah.
Is Texas still in the mix for enough guys now out of the at defensive tackle? I know Draylon McCoy out of Tupelo, Mississippi is a name I'm hearing a lot of lately. James Johnson out of North Fort Myers. So you went down to see Damari Simeon, New Jersey kid. What's going on at defensive line right now for Texas?
Yeah, so I actually think Texas D-line has a really good net cast. And Lamar Brown wants to be recruited as a D lineman, so I'm throwing him in that bucket.
Okay.
And that's where he's at Miami. Then he'll be at Texas next week in Lamar Brown, then A&M and LSU. So we'll see. Does a Southern Lab kid not go to LSU? We'll see. But I love where Texas is at as far as the net of talent they've cast at D-line. I think Jamion Winfield, because of what we just talked about with USC, he's right now not off the board, but off the realistic list. We'll revisit that during the season, right? But Kendall Gerville out of Fort Myers, I think I could see that coming down to Texas, Georgia, but Florida's going to be right there. For him. I think he's at FSU this weekend. You mentioned James Johnson. That's going to be a big battle. Damari Simeon out of New Jersey, I think, is a tremendous player. And that's Texas versus Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. He's at Michigan this weekend. Tico Crittenden's a possibility out of Georgia as well. We'll see if Texas actually brings him in for that OV. Bryce Perry Wright out of Buford is kind of that Barron Sorrell type of edge that has a bigger frame, so he could be kind of that 5-tech guy. He could be an interior guy on third downs. He's at Clemson. I think the family's related to Grady Jarrett, I believe, at Clemson. But look, I think Texas is right there for him. You mentioned Draylon McCoy out of Tupelo. I mean, you go down the list of guys. Texas has a really good net cast. Vodney Cleveland out of Birmingham Parker is going to be in on the 13th. Texas has a Valden Sohn, who's coming in on June 20th. The D lineman from Sweden who's at Dyke, Virginia, at Blue Ridge School. I think Texas is right there for him. So I like where Texas is at as far as their prospects on the defensive line. Dylan Berryman's coming in next weekend as well. But the key here is what 3 are you going to get? And that's still to be determined. But I do like the net Texas is cast at D-line and at edge, by the way. I think they're in on some really, really good players. But I would say this, even the Texas staff right now, I don't think they truly know which guys they're going to get asked to play out.
Gotcha. Defensive end, you mentioned, you talked about some guys there, Luke Wafel out of New Jersey, Richie Wesley out of Chatsworth, California, Trenton Henderson from Pensacola, in-state Jamarian Colton, Dre Quinn out of Atlanta. A lot of guys, possibilities.
Dre Quinn is a name to know. I think, look, Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame, Georgia. I mean, it's an everybody in it battle, but Texas doing well with Dre Quinn right now. Jake Krull also out of IMG is a guy that Lau and Clark went to see. So Texas has a number of guys at edge, and they're doing well in some of those recruitments, but they're all still in the balance.
Gotcha. All right. Let's go to linebacker real quick, Jerry. Xavier Griffin sounds like a name that we need to know more about out of Gainesville, Georgia. Cozy Okpala out of Maid Creek. He's been a guy that we've been talking about. Braden Rouse out of Marietta Kell High School in Georgia. Then you have guys like Calvin Thomas in-state, as well as Tank King. Where is Texas going at linebacker beyond what we think is Xavier Griffin and possibly Cozy Okpala right now?
Yeah, Xavier Griffin, obviously, he's at Ohio State this weekend. Then he goes to Bama, then Texas. He's slated to – FSU's on that visit list. He's slated to make a decision June 29th. I like where Texas sits with him right now, but I want to caution people, look, as we've seen, this stuff can change really quickly right now in this NIL landscape. So I like where Texas sits headed into the Ohio State weekend. We'll see where they sit coming out of the June 13th OV. Cozy Okpala is a guy I think's been leaned to Texas for a while. I believe he's at Penn State this weekend. Then he goes to Miami. So those schools I think are going to be kind of Texas competition right there, possibly Baylor for him as well. Braden Rouse, Texas, I think is very much in the hunt there with Alabama, with Tennessee, and with Michigan. Tyler Atkinson, I think, is a long shot, but I want to keep mentioning him, the five-star from Grayson there in Loganville, Georgia. He's at Clemson this weekend. I think Georgia leads Ohio State, Clemson, and I think Texas is probably behind those three. But I think there's a chance he's on campus in June. People close to him keep saying he's likely going to make an official visit, but he hasn't released the date yet. Tank King's more of the inside linebacker in this group, the pure inside linebacker out of Port Arthur Memorial. I think Notre Dame's somewhat been considered the favorite there. He's going to visit A&M. He's going to visit Texas as well, all coming up in June. And Talanoa Ely, the linebacker out of Kahuku, who played last year at Orange Lutheran in Orange, California. Texas is in that. He's visiting. Obviously, USC is going to be in that recruitment as well as Alabama is in that recruitment, a couple others. So I think the number at linebackers 3, Bobby, and for Texas to hit on 3 of those guys, I think they're going to have to win out for Xavier Griffin and Cozy Okpala, and then kind of let the chips fall around that to get the 3 early on.
In the secondary, Jerry, Texas already has 2 guys, one from New Orleans, Hayward Howard Jr., and then one from right there in Austin, Gaheem Riley, who committed on May 16th. Who do you think they add to that group, or who are the key candidates to watch?
Well, this is where recruiting is getting really interesting and fun. Is last 2 or 3 weeks, we've behind the scenes been told by a couple of people, look, there's confidence with on the Texas side with the Samari Matthews recruitment out of Huff High in North Carolina. Mark Orfe went out there twice. He had a great unofficial visit. Texas gets him on campus June 13th. Then he knocks Clemson out, and he's at Miami this weekend. So what does Miami do to try to change the course of that recruitment? Because 3 weeks ago, we were told Texas slight favorite over Clemson, South Carolina, FSU also on the visit list. Clemson has 4 defensive back commits now. They were switched out for Miami. Now he's at Miami this weekend. So we'll see if Miami can kind of change the direction of that recruitment. But that's one that Texas has felt pretty good about. Then you have Devon Benjamin, who I believe he's at Michigan this weekend. I think he's coming into Texas next weekend. Could that change to the 20th? It's always possible, but I think there's a chance he's in next weekend. Then there's Justice Fitzpatrick out of St. Thomas Aquinas, younger brother of Minka Fitzpatrick. He's at Georgia this weekend, where all the ties are in this recruitment, and I think they've been the favorite for a while because of Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann. They were a big part of Minka Fitzpatrick's recruitment back in Alabama and his development. Kirby got the Georgia guard job. Glenn Schumann was some time in Alabama with Minka before going to Georgia. But Miami's also in that mix. Ohio State's in that mix. He's visiting Texas June 20th through 22nd. So, again, we're going to have to see. But with the 2 guys in the boat, and you don't really know what Jermaine Bishop is. He could play either way. So let's call it 2.5 right now. They're in a pretty good spot at defensive back, and I like, as long as they close out on Samari Matthews, then kind of let the chips fall either with a Fitzpatrick or Devon Benjamin. Do you get one of those 2 guys? Then at that point, you would have a solid defensive back class. The question is, do they get one of those other 2 guys if they follow through and get Samari Matthews?
Makes sense. All right, Jerry, that's going to do it for this afternoon's show. We'll be talking more about the Longhorns and recruiting efforts tomorrow night on the live stream. Good luck to the baseball team tonight as well. So, all right, for Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. This has been On Texas Football. Okay.